In 2018, Naval Postgraduate School's Captain Wayne Hughes, with co-author Admiral Robert Guerrier, released the third edition of Fleet Tactics and Naval Operations. In this third short video interview in our series, our focus will be on the impact of information warfare on naval tactics. Many consider information warfare a recent addition to the warfighter's toolkit. However, the different editions of Fleet Tactics have illustrated that information warfare, in the form of cryptography, deception, and misinformation, have been employed for several centuries. Captain Hughes, thank you for joining us again to continue our discussion about the third edition of your book, Fleet Tactics. But Wayne, before we start, I have to ask, tell me about the hat.
I thought you and the audience needed to know that I'm not just an academic. I spent 30 years on active duty. I had 2 commands at sea and another command ashore. I was in the Korean War, I was in the Vietnam War, and I had a tour in a NATO command, and all of those things helped me prepare for writing the book.
Well, great. So, Captain Hughes, one of the new chapters in the third edition of Fleet Tactics deals with the influence of information warfare. I understand this edition was specifically requested by Admiral Richardson for inclusion in the third edition. Could you tell us why?
CNO thought that information warfare was becoming more and more important as an influence in future combat and future operations, and he wanted to help the Navy stay abreast, stay ahead of the enemy, and that was one of the important things he had in mind when we did the third edition. Not only is there a new chapter specifically on information warfare, but my co-author Bob Guerrier and I also vetted the rest of the book to see if there were other places where we could spiffy up the book and make it more current. Next time, when we have our interview on the imaginary battle of the Aegean, it'll be an opportunity for me to show some of the specific tactical ways in which information warfare is influencing the future of combat.
Well, excellent. I look forward to our next discussion. But to continue this one, some may think of information warfare as a fairly recent addition to the warfighter's toolkit. However, the different editions of Fleet Tactics have illustrated that information warfare, in the form of cryptology, deception, and misinformation, have been employed for several centuries. Might you share some examples?
Let me start with the Age of Fighting Sail. When Nelson fought the Battle of the Nile, that came after 3 weeks of searching for the French fleet because they'd gotten out of their port and snuck off, and he went in every which way and finally found them and defeated them. In the Age of Fighting Sail, as far as tactics were concerned, you had to see the sails of the enemy before you could close him and fight him. By World War I, one of the things that was going on was the influence of radio. Radio was coming into its own, and radio signals could be intercepted. That led to encrypting the radio transmissions, and that in turn led to code breaking as a big and important factor in how to, for example, at the Battle of Jutland, it came about because the British had broken the German code, and when the High Seas Fleet was coming out, the British knew it, and there was a chance for them to attack. Fast forward to World War II, and now aerial search, which was just coming into its own in World War I, was now a big deal, to the extent that surface raiders could no longer be employed, and the enemy had to depend more and more on submarines.
In what ways does the third edition of your book show how information warfare has changed and grown in importance?
Well, first, I have 2 reasons. First, the new book updates information warfare by listing many of the new techniques that are being developed now and will be used. It cites new books by Eric Dahl and Dorothy Denning,
both NPS professors,
and Barton Whaley, who was a part-time professor here, and then many contributions by John Arquilla, who is a distinguished professor and also one of our department chairmen. Second, there's an emphasis on the techniques that are going to be employed by information warfare. Some of these are artificial intelligence, machine learning, cyber intrusions, and unmanned robotic air, surface, and subsurface systems. In a special category is the rise in importance of big data. We have seen the growth in ways that we can acquire information, for example, through satellites, through many forms of detection at longer and longer ranges. And that means that we can be overwhelmed by that data, and we've got to have a way to process it. All of this is towards the end of also confounding the enemy's detection and processing systems, because it all boils down to the sixth cornerstone that we discussed in the first session.
Yes.
You need to attack effectively first, and in order to do that, you've got to get the key data from that plethora of data so you can go after him and hit him before he hits you.
How has the emergence of unmanned systems and cyber vulnerabilities enhanced the importance of information warfare?
That's a big question, so I'll try to be concise. A good example is how unmanned systems have, especially when they're programmed as robots, are increasingly going to be able to attack in swarms. I have a suspicion that that's going to mean that we're going to have to figure out ways to defend swarm attacks with swarm defenses. Unmanned systems can search where human beings ought not to go. We can put them at risk without putting at risk the life of a human being. Insofar as cyber attacks go, there are 2 points to be made. One is that they can come from any direction, as it were, almost out of the blue. They can be any level of complexity. They can be one of a kind. They can come in batches, and all of that is affecting our operations in peacetime, in crisis, and it's going to affect in any level of conflict. A good example is what Russia did when they moved into Georgia, when they moved into the Crimea, when they moved into the Ukraine, and I might add what they've been doing in trying to mess with our politics here at home. I think we should be studying them and China's different mode of operations and be as good or better than they are in taking the offense.
With the developing science of artificial intelligence and machine learning, are we at a tipping point where warfare becomes a more machine-driven activity than a human-driven one? And will this diminish the importance of one of your 6 cornerstones, sailors matter most?
No, I don't think so. I think artificial intelligence is best dealt with when it helps sailors and not when it replaces sailors. President Rondeau herself has talked about the importance of creating more digital warriors, and by that she means recruiting and training and educating officers and enlisted men who can team with the new technologies in order to fight more effectively. John Arquilla and Peter Denning have shown from research they've done that a machine, when it aids a human being, will be better at defeating either a machine acting alone or a human being acting alone.
You discuss in the book how information technologies can aid us in training and education. Could you highlight your points here?
I grew up at a time when the technologies that were going to assist training were just bursting on the scene. All the way back to World War II, where I was not, there were rudimentary aircraft trainers, little cockpits that you sat in and learned better how to fly without a lot of motion. Many years later, I had the opportunity to sit in a cockpit with visuals, 360-degree visuals in a dome, and remember trying to do, I was a surface officer, so I didn't do this very well, trying to do air combat where it was safe but exciting. When I was a junior officer, we had an ASW trainer, and I was operating with a hunter-killer ASW group, and we'd go to the trainer, and it was pretty advanced technology for the day. More and more, the technology to train and educate using simulations has grown in importance, and we need to be on the lookout for other opportunities in the future.
Finally, is there anything more you'd like to share with us?
The two most satisfying paragraphs in my chapter on information warfare concluded that information warfare is for young people. I quote a young Navy lieutenant who wrote a paper for the director of information warfare, in which he pointed out that some of the leading people went to college in computer technology and all the things that have been going on. People that invented Apple and Microsoft, they went to college for a couple of years and then got an idea and they quit and they went out and made lots of money and brought on this technological thing that's going on now. What's the implication for us? Well, I think it is that senior officers need to be aware that this is a young person's business, and the best thing we can do is get out of the way, nurture them, help them, let them take risks, let them make some mistakes, and if they do that, we'll catch up and stay ahead.
Well, that sounds like an excellent plan for the future. Thank you, Wayne, for another engaging discussion about the third edition of Fleet Tactics. Thank you for allowing us to share another engaging discussion with Captain Wayne Hughes on the third edition of his book, Fleet Tactics. We hope you will take a moment to view other episodes in this series.